Leigh Whannell followed up his directorial debut with a story set in the near future about an advanced computer chip that allows a man to walk again. And also kicked copious amounts of ass. Let's check out Upgrade. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I come in peace.
Welcome everyone to a science fiction movie podcast. We watch a movie, we talk about it. It's that simple. On this episode, we are looking at Upgrade, the film from 2008, directed by Leigh Whannell.
2018.
2018, sorry.
Yes.
Slip. Freudian slip. But yes, this is our Patreon vote winner every month at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. The patrons get 3 options of a sci-fi movie for one of the episodes, and this was all sort of cyberpunky dystopian style movies, and Upgrade was the winner. So we're going to get into it, and we'll start spoiler free as we always do. And of course, at the very end of the show, David will reveal what old Ace episode he's went back and caught up on by watching the movie for.
Yep. I'm trying to stay in genre, give or take, like subgenre.
Give or take, okay.
That's going to be a lot more difficult as we progress.
Probably, but you'll get David's homework at the end of the episode. But we'll get into Upgrade, which is a near future type film. It's a film about cybernetic upgrades into human bodies, particularly the main character who ends up being quadriplegic. Gets an enhancement chip to let him walk again, but it actually puts like a computer system inside his body that starts talking to him. And yeah, it's also a bit of a revenge story, so we'll get into all the specifics later, but I'll just sort of leave it there for the general synopsis. It's a bit of an action movie as well, so we'll get into all that stuff. But I had seen this before. I saw it when it came out 5 years ago.
Okay.
So this was a revisit for me. I assume it was a first time for you?
Yes, however, as soon as the first action scene kicked in, I remember seeing that before. Somebody, because it's very creative the way they do it, so somebody posted that to say, hey, look at this cool action scene. So I've at least seen that much. Okay,
all right. So this was interesting to get into it when it came out, because Leigh Whannell had been a writer on a number of things. He co-wrote or wrote Saw, he wrote Insidious, so he worked with James Wan a few times. He made his directorial debut with the third Insidious film, and I thought that was a pretty solid standalone sequel, to be honest. I was kind of like impressed that he because first time directors, you never know how it's going to go, but I remember watching that movie and thinking, you know what, I couldn't tell it wasn't an experienced director. It was clearly someone who's been learning from the directors he's been working with over the years and whatever, and is doing a good job now that he's having the chance himself. And this was kind of like his first completely standalone, separate from everything else. Because last time it was a sequel to a movie that he'd already worked on, so it was, I don't want to say it was like a safety net, but there was a bit of a cozy atmosphere.
There was already a style that was established by the series as a whole that he could just imitate in worst case scenario.
So I was curious getting into this, especially since this wasn't a horror movie. This was a sci-fi action movie. I was like, okay, I see what he's going to do with this. He's since went on to do The Invisible Man with Elizabeth Moss. That came out in 2020. That was not the last movie I saw before the pandemic kicked in, but it was the last good movie I saw before the pandemic kicked in.
I remember I always went to the mall near my work for food during my lunch breaks, and right before pandemic kicked in, when like stuff was starting to shut down, there was a big poster for Invisible Man just right there. And it always caught my eye because I was like, I don't think anyone's going to get the chance to see that movie. I think that's going to be off the market before it comes out.
No, I mean, I think people did, because there was because I think the last big movie people saw in February of that year was Sonic, because Invisible Man was January. Unfortunately, the last movie I saw before the pandemic was The Boy 2, which I don't want to talk about.
What do you mean, unfortunately?
You know exactly what I mean. Don't even start. So we'll get into Upgrade then. David, what did you think of Upgrade?
Well, first off, me saying that I've seen that action scene before, I didn't know that was for this movie, like right up until that scene happened, and I was like, oh, okay. In that case, I'm now more into this. Very slow start. I think once it really gets into the meat of what it wants to do, it's very entertaining. I really do actually enjoy it. Um, I'd say that my biggest critique with it is probably the idea that there's a few things that it brings up as, I don't want to say MacGuffins, but like things that are a part of this world that are interesting for the one scene that they do anything with, and then they just kind of drop it. And there's also a big problem where it doesn't fully explore the depths to which this computer in this guy's body can really control things for him or do things for him. It's a solid concept. I just wish it had been a little bit more thought out in terms of what it can actually be done with. But I think the action scenes and the general vibe overall save the movie wholesale. I think that that's worth the price of admission entirely.
Yeah, I think ultimately I'm a bit mixed on it because I do think some of the elements aren't as fleshed out as they should be. I think the ending especially feels very rushed. Like they do something where you realize they're building to an ending, and I'm like, okay, they've set up this new thing, and then you look at the timer and there's like 10 minutes left.
Right.
And
yeah,
it's like,
that was
okay, I guess you're running out of time here. We have to get through this as quickly as possible, which is especially disappointing because, like you say, the action's so inventive that I was expecting, at least the first time I watched it, I was expecting a big third act set piece, like a big, like all the things that he's been doing and sort of learning to do throughout the movie were going to pay off in a big way in the ending, and the ending has no action in it. It's really weird and anticlimactic from a, in terms of what I liked about the movie up until that point. It felt like it wasn't playing on its strengths and instead pivoted to something else, which I didn't think conceptually was a bad idea, but I do think it was poorly executed in how it was actually presented. So
that's kind of what I was saying at the beginning there, is what they have these different things they bring up in concept, and then they don't really ever come back to it again. And it kind of felt like that's how the ending played out as well, where they just brought up this thing and said, yep, that's a possibility now, and then just ended the movie.
Yeah. There's some teases throughout, there's some little like seeds that are planted, but they're not enough to make it feel like the whole movie was building to that, especially in terms of what the character's arc is supposed to be, or what I felt it was going to be based on the entire first act, which I think does, well, it's a little slow, it does do a good job of setting up who the characters are, kind of like some of the key ideas we're going to be working with, and setting up some dramatic ironies given what's going to happen to him and what he's going to go through. That stuff's all solid enough. The big thing here, though, really is how inventive the action is shot, because I think the big thing is that the computer in his body takes over when he gets into action scenes. So we have this interesting dynamic where the head of the character who's in the action scenes is reacting to the scene almost as if he's part of the audience. Like, he's reacting to the things that his hands are doing. And that's a really interesting and very unique concept. And on top of that, the way it's directed is quite stylized, and it makes sense given that he's a passenger in his own body. There's a lot of typically you refer to this as chest cam, because normally it's like a camera attached to the actor's chest, and it has the effect where you're looking at the face and it feels like the background's moving around when the person's walking, but the person's staying still. And this movie kind of does that, but it does it with even wider shots. So there's like a moment where he's walking into the apartment just after he's had all this happen, and it just looks kind of surreal because he feels like he's really smooth in his motion, but the surroundings are kind of, shaky and bouncing up and down, and it just gives it this surreal feel. I think that stuff is like really Leigh Whannell flexing his muscles and doing a good job as a director, but he did also write this movie, so he also shares the blame for everything that we're going to say is not working here either.
Yeah, I think it is a movie that is a lot more style over substance. It does have some cool ideas to it. I mean, just going back in his history here, he wrote the first Saw movie. He was around for that stuff. And I think this movie shares the same sort of problems that had, where Saw is a great movie, but it's a lot of like flash and bang and less of the story being told. Whereas I think that this movie, stylistically, action scenes, fantastic. I think it is very well shot, and it's pretty well paced as well. But there is just this underlying issue of you didn't fully flesh out the world as deeply as I think you should have if you're going to be giving it this much thought on other aspects as well.
I'll agree with the pacing, except the ending. I think the ending feels like it's rushing to once you get to like 10 minutes from the end, it feels like it's just rushing at that point to wrap up. But
there was a point where they definitively started the third act, and I was like, oh, okay, how much time is left? And it's like 17 minutes. And I was like, oh, no, movie. You need more. You need a little more there.
Yeah, I think one of my things is that it's really inventive, like we say. It's doing all these stylistic things, but where it falls down as well, I would say, is that other than the main character, Gray, I actually think he's quite good, and I think Logan Marshall Green, who plays him, is very good in the role. I discovered him. I'd seen him in a couple of things already, actually, but I think I really discovered him and remembered who he was because he was great in a movie called The Invitation. It's a horror movie that came out in, I want to say, 2015. Okay. So he kind of had my attention get into this as well. So it was like a director who was sort of on the rise. It was an actor who, to me, was on the rise. And I went into this, and I think he's great. I think all of the other characters in the movie, though, suffer from being very thin. I think the villains feel very undeveloped as well. I'm going to keep coming back to that word, but the villains feel very underdeveloped to me. There's other characters. There's a cop character that I think feels like she's pretty much an afterthought.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I was going to look up where I saw that cop from before, because she's a very familiar actress, but I just never got around to that. Who is she?
Yeah. I felt this with a lot of characters, and honestly, the sort of tech genius billionaire who came up with the tech, I think he's the worst character in the whole movie.
I mean, you're right, but I also couldn't get over the fact that his name is Aaron, spelled E-R-O-N, and I'm like, you really just wanted Elon, didn't you? You wanted to name him Elon, and you had to change it for legal reasons.
But this was made before most of his shown how much of an ass he was.
Yeah, before he showed how much of an ass, for sure. But he had already been around as I'm the man who's gonna get us to Mars.
Yeah, this was before I'm going to buy Twitter. Oh no, I don't want it anymore. Oh shit, I've went too far, and they'll be sued if I don't buy it. Okay,
Come on in, everyone who's banned before.
I guess I am buying Twitter all of a sudden. All right, well, that's that. Well, it's a few billion down the drain. Down his couch.
Still going to Mars. Please don't forget that.
Yeah, we'll see. So, no, I think it's a mixed bag of a film. I enjoy all the little touches of this future. It feels like a very realistic future in that there's still a lot of things that feel kind of old school that are in it, but all of the tech that's kind of in there does feel like an evolution of things that we have. The self-driving cars are a bit more advanced. Stuff like there's computer screens and chips and more things and whatnot.
That's what I actually really liked about this movie compared to something like Minority Report, where Minority Report, it felt like everybody was just on board with all the tech. Like, no matter what, it was just blanket of everyone was like, yep, we're all good. Whereas this movie, our main character and several other characters are established as like, yes, some of it is okay, but I have limits, and there's different levels that people go to of how much they're willing to let the tech just absorb their entire lifestyle.
Yeah, that goes for the characters for sure, but even just in terms of how it's integrated into the world, it doesn't feel like everything has to look futuristic. The couches still just look like modern couches. The other things just look like modern. Like at one point, he goes into a guy's house, and it looks like some grunt's house. But the table happens to be this fancy computer where you can turn it on and check your text messages and shit. And it's okay, the way that when you think of smartwatches, phones, or smart TVs integrate, the rest of the houses still look pretty similar to what they were before, but there is this specific tech that's really more advanced, and that's what this movie treats it like. It treats it like, no, there's just specific things that have gotten more advanced, but the things that wouldn't change have not changed, and that's okay.
There was, even in that same scene with this guy's house that looks totally normal, they make a specific comment of oh, his lock is still manual, so it can't be overridden by this computer chip. It's oh, so it's not this all-encompassing thing. People who want to still have this level of privacy or this little level of control, they can just do that. It's not something where it's a mandate of no, you want to drive on the roads, you need to have a self-driving car.
Yeah, and also things like the lock. It's just a simple, like, how many features do houses that were built in the last 10 years have that most houses don't have still because they were all built prior, and it takes a long time to go and retrofit houses with different tech, you know? So it makes sense that there would be a lot of old buildings that still have old style stuff in them. Yeah.
I will say it's not in the movie itself. It's actually like freeze frame, and you got to do some math and stuff on it. But trivia wise, this does take place apparently in 2046.
Okay.
So the exact year does not matter to the movie, but it is that idea of it's near-ish future.
Yeah. And nothing in this, by and large, feels... There's one particular weapon I think feels really far-fetched, but other than that, like, there's almost no tech in this that feels like, this feels far-fetched for, 25 years away from now.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Not at all. Especially with the rate we're going at. It seems like everything here is pretty reasonable. My only... I don't even want to call it a criticism as much as just
I suppose technically, other than the computer chip that attaches to the guy's spine, obviously that. But that's the whole point of the movie, is that bit.
Yeah, that's all. In the context of the movie, that chip is already super advanced.
Yes.
But I think the only thing that I have, not in as much of I don't believe the tech can exist, as much as I just hate the idea of it, is that all future tech has to be hexagons. Like, that's the style. It's just, if you're in the future, hexagons. It's the way you go.
I will take the hexagons over everything being transparent, because a lot of sci-fi does that, and I'm like, no one wants to have someone else be able to see what they're doing on the other side of the screen when they're holding a tablet. No one wants that.
You can get away with it exactly one time for like one generation, because people will be so obsessive over the fact of, this is it, this is the future tech. And then once they get used to it, they're never going to want it again. Yeah.
So, yeah, believable future, I guess, as a column in the plus column that goes. Same, I think, with Logan Marshall Green. His character's definitely the best developed, and I think the way it's shot and the direction is really solid. A lot of the other elements, though, I do think are lackluster.
That's
and
fair.
Keep it from being great or even like outright good. I would say it's kind of in this space where it's worth seeing for the things that it does well. But I think I've seen this twice now, because I watched it when it came out and I've watched it here for the review. But I do think this is a one and done. I think this is a sort of movie where you watch, you think certain parts of it are cool, but you probably never are really going to feel the need to watch it again.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of thing where me seeing that action scene outside of the context of the movie, I was happy to get the context to it, but really just seeing the action scene cut out entirely, that's most of the draw to this. I didn't really feel like the 45 minutes prior to it were required to at least be 45 minutes. You could boil that thing down into like a 3-minute montage, and I'd be like, yep, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. I do think the opening is well paced, though, for all things considered, because I think it does a good job of setting up who this guy is, because it sets up that he is someone who likes like traditional cars. He doesn't like relying on technology, and of course that's it's like an ironic touch, because he's going to rely on it later in the film. There's even like a joke early on where he's saying, hey, are you talking to your car? And of course later on he's going to be talking to his biochip. So
yeah, exactly.
It's doing these little things to kind of set things up, and I do think most of that's appreciated, and it falls short of ever being completely sative on a narrative level, I think. And I think that's where it falls short, and it's a shame, because I do think the ideas are really good, and I think some elements of it are really great even, but
yeah, I mean, I think that the story as a whole is okay. I don't have an issue with the larger beats. My biggest problem, as you said before, the villains are very underdeveloped, and I think that essentially this is just a daisy chain movie where he finds one guy, they point him to another guy, and then he just keeps doing that like 6 times, which causes it to be that none of the villains are really able to feel like, no, they're the big one that you're going to have to deal with this time. It's just, all right, what's coming up next? What's next down the chain?
Yeah, it makes a half-hearted attempt of giving him an opponent that's more on his level, because obviously it's like, hey, he's really good at fighting now because the computer's doing it for him. But it fails to, like, okay, but there's like a nemesis who's going to be on equal footing, and it's going to actually be tough you might lose this. They kind of do it half-heartedly in a way. Like you can point at the scene that's technically supposed to be that, but it's so like it's so quickly introduced and then so quickly dealt with, and it isn't even the climax of the movie, so it doesn't feel like it has the weight behind it to make it feel like that. That
fight happens, I think, just as the third act begins, if I'm remembering the structure right. Like it is the third act just kicks in, he goes to fight this guy, and then we go to the rest of the plot, and it's just not well put together.
Yeah, so some definite rough edges, but I would say it's worth seeing for what it does well. But just keep expectations somewhat in check. And
now here's a question for you, because this is a comparison that I saw at the time, and then I want to throw out my own comparison now that it's 2023. Venom, the movie,
and notably Logan Marshall Green does not. There's a fair resemblance to Tom Hardy. One cannot deny that.
So apparently the director has heard that, according to trivia, and he denies ever even knowing about Venom as a character, let alone seeing the movie. So,
but did the Venom movie come out before this?
I think it was around the same time. I could be incorrect, but the main one.
I'm just not sure if it was. Like I felt like this was first, but I could be wrong.
It was also 2018. This one was released.
If it's the same year, then it couldn't have copied it.
No, I don't think it would have copied it. But I think it's just one of those things where it's kind of the same thing going on.
This
where
is
it's
just if I was going to say it's like a Dante's Peak and Volcano type situation, but it's not even that, because with those, I know that like when it comes to those types of movies, it usually does. It's not a coincidence because one studio hears that the other studio is doing a film about a volcano, so then they rush their own film about a volcano. I don't think that even happened here. I don't think anyone heard, oh, Venom's going to include like a voice in his head talking to him, so we have to do a movie like that. I think this is purely a coincidence. That
I agree. Yeah. However, I do want to bring up the second one. Now it's 2023, Blue Beetle.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, the character Blue Beetle has already existed long before this movie was made, and this is pretty much exactly that. This is the character of Blue Beetle down to a T.
Well, in terms of the tech, sure, yeah.
Yeah, the tech, yeah.
I guess so. I have no comment, really. I'm still not that interested in seeing the Blue Beetle movie, if that's what you're getting at.
Oh, God, no. No, definitely not.
Yeah. And to be fair, that's only the Jaime Reyes version of Blue Beetle.
Right, the most recent one.
Yeah. Ted Kord Blue Beetle is very different than that, but
I mean, that is still at least, 2008, 2009 that was established, so...
I think the concept of there's a computer or voice inside you can talk to and let it like help you fight is such a broad concept. I still don't think this is... I don't think this is inspired from any of these examples, honestly.
Oh, no. That's I don't think it's ever inspired as such, but I'm just trying to trace it back to where I guess like the origin of it was, where the first one... But I guess what it really is it's just an evolution of the guy in the chair.
No, if I was to trace it, if I was to like make a guess of something that inspired this, the example I might give is Knight Rider.
Okay.
It's just the voice was the car, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's an evolution of that. It wouldn't surprise me if Leigh Whannell was a Knight Rider fan.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially we got a whole car chase in this movie, so he's definitely at least somewhat interested.
And the self-driving cars, which admittedly is a thing now. But they don't have minds of their own, though. Well,
no, not yet. We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there.
Do we want to get there, though? Is that something we want?
Oh, I'm not saying we want it, but we will get there.
Okay, yeah, all right. The cars will revolt. Quite right.
That's going to be the best Terminator reboot. Wasn't it? As soon as they realize, oh, we're not going to make endoskeletons. That's too inconvenient. We're just going to put them on wheels.
Okay, so are we about ready for spoilers then?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Movie? Yeah,
I got nothing
else.
All
right, so spoilers then for Upgrade. From this point on, you have been warned. So the movie, well, interestingly, to tease kind of the tech that's going to be in the movie, they have a voice say the first few credits. So instead of them coming up on screen, you have a voice saying, "BH Tilt and so Productions present upgrade. But it's like a computerized voice, obviously. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
okay,
and
that's
you
interesting.
see the little voice like bumps, the voice lines to it.
Yeah, it's not quite sound waves, but yeah, it's a similar idea. But yeah, that sets us in, and yeah, it introduces this character who is working, and I think this is very important, is that he's working in a garage, and we don't see the outside world at first. We just see him working on a car. It could be present day for all we know. There's just traditional things about the place, and I thought a really interesting touch here. I think I only noticed this because it's my second time watching it, in terms of a thematic little thing. But he like cuts his finger by accident at one point, and he like just sort of sucks it briefly in his mouth to get rid of the blood, and then quickly goes on, and he doesn't really pay attention to it. It's just like a little thing. And I'm not saying this is a big deal, but it's sort of like, you know what, this is kind of like almost a foreshadowing of like him not caring about stuff happening to his limbs and his body.
Yeah. I think obviously because of how this gets at the very, very end, it's also shown to be just an innately human thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
Is, you cut yourself, you get a little cut, you just lick it off. That's just born into our DNA.
So introduce the wife who's coming back, but she's in the fancy self-driving car. She's got the big job at a tech company and all that stuff.
I love her introduction line as she's video calling with some dude, and his line to her is, "You can't be a capitalist and a humanitarian at the same time." And she just like brushes it off, and I'm like, no, that's worth listen to him. That seems like a pretty important thing to analyze in this movie.
Look, she's the breadwinner of the family, okay? Right? I know technically Gray is making a little bit of money fixing up old cars for people who care about old cars, but I can't imagine it's as much as her fancy tech job. So
no, definitely not.
But they drop some lines here about him not liking the self-driving cars. He likes the traditional car. He likes to work with his hands and doesn't like the idea of tech taking over. And even something as simple as when they go inside and she's like, "Hey, do you want to order a pizza?" And he's like, "Let's make a pizza." Like, he likes to actually just do it himself. He likes to be proactive. Now, admittedly, this is a really silly example because ordering pizza is not exactly a high-tech solution here. That's pretty... People have been doing that for decades and decades already in our timeline.
Yeah.
So...
I feel like the better option there would have been something like, "Hey, do you want to order in from that sandwich place?" or something like that. Like something that you could feasibly make simply at your own home. But
yes,
pizza, I guess, is easy enough.
Yeah. Of course, you can make pizza yourself. Like, of course you can, but most people don't.
No.
So,
I mean, to be fair, I make pizza for myself like once a week, so... I don't think that that's common. I don't think that that's something that a lot of people do, but I do because I really like pizza.
Well, you actually roll the dough and...
No, I mean, yeah, limits. I have the pre-made crust and then I apply the toppings.
That doesn't count. No.
No, that's clearly what they're talking about in the movie. I don't expect them to, like... At what point do you then draw the line of, like, no, if you don't grow your own wheat, then you're not making the pizza?
No. I'm not saying you have to grow your own wheat, but if you're not flipping around dough in your hand, right, then you're not making pizza. You're just applying toppings. It's different.
I disagree, but that's mainly because I want to feel good about myself, so shut up.
As I said, I baked a cake. I bought a plain pre-made cake and just added some icing. Like, no.
All right, but then what's the limit there? Because, like, clearly some people, if you bought, like, the pre-made mixing of a cake and then you had to mix it all together, you didn't make that mixing.
I'll admit, there's a grey area here when you're buying sort of like ready-to-bake elements, but typically I would say that if you say you're cooking, if you say you're actually making the pizza or making the cake, then I expect you to put the ingredients together and it'll have to raise in the oven, right? These are the important things.
All right. I don't accept that, but I will at least we can agree to disagree here.
And for the record, I'm saying this as someone who cannot cook, okay, and who's never baked anything in his life. But I still think this is I'm not letting David take credit for something here as if I can't do it. I can do what he's doing with this.
What is the line to making a taco then?
Making a taco? Well, it's like making a sandwich. So you get the bread, you get the ingredients, you put them together.
Okay, so making changes definition depending on what type of food we're making then. because all I'm doing is adding taco or toppings into a burrito, and that's making a taco. But adding toppings onto a pre-made pizza crust, that's not making a pizza.
Well, because a pizza crust is half the goddamn battle, and it's already done. Like, no one's going to argue that you've not made a sandwich if you're using bread that you didn't bake yourself.
And that's what I'm saying, how far back to, because I have a bread maker too. I could do that. That's not that's not where the line is.
You could, but you don't.
Exactly.
Yes, but you wouldn't say, yeah, but no one would say I made a sandwich from scratch, because if someone said that, then I probably would assume they baked their own bread.
Okay, all right. I'm not happy with it. I'm not okay, but I see your line. I can establish, I see where you're carving a line. I just disagree. I think it's further back.
Especially since pizza crust, you can do many different things with the pizza. You could have the thin crust, you could have a stuffed crust, you could have a deep dish. You have so many options, and you decide that when you make it. But you didn't decide any of this. You bought a crust.
Yes. And then I use that to make a pizza.
You used it as a pizza base.
You're saying this as if it's going to convince me that, like, I did not put together the things to make a pizza.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Anyway, yeah.
You're also not making the sauce, are you, though?
No, that one I have tomatoes. I fully go all the way on that.
Yeah, sure you do. Sure you do. No, you've got a jar of ready-to-go pizza sauce.
Fine, but I do get my own cow milk and wait for it to curdle into cheese. See, all that stuff just is furthering my point, where you can't reasonably expect to make a pizza without saying that there's some predefined line of where it is making it.
I will admit that it varies from food to food, okay? Certain foods, when someone says they made something, I expect a certain level of skill involved with it. If someone says they made a pizza, I expect they actually rolled the dough, made the base, put on the toppings.
You know, this entire thing began because I had to fill air while you let your cat out of the room.
Look, if anything, I would say the pizza dough, like, I don't expect even people who are making pizza in a pizza shop to, like, necessarily make their own sauce. I would accept them using pre-bought sauce. It's the dough I expect them to do from scratch.
Okay. I mean, I am not Papa John. I cannot do that. I do not have the capabilities to in my
Well, don't get off your
home.
high horse then. I make a pizza every
You're
week.
acting as if this I'm coming in here and being like, "Hey everyone, I'm better than you because I make a pizza every week." I was saying it A, to fill air, but B, because I can at least understand what the character was talking about, because I don't expect him to make the crust either.
Definitely blowing some hot air here, I'll tell you that.
It's warm in my room.
Okay, anyway, so establishes the characters as obviously, I know it's going to be a revenge story. It's probably in the trailer, but there is definitely a vibe of, okay, this wife is definitely dying. Okay, we're definitely killing this woman. They're too happy.
They do this thing where they both talk to each other and reference each other as wife and husband. And it just felt so unnatural to me, but at the same time, once I accepted, okay, they just talk like that, then it was immediately down the lines of, yeah, they're way too happy and comfortable in their relationship. Something's about to go horribly wrong.
It was just maybe quirky, I think. This is how they refer to each other, you know. It's like, I mean, how many people after the Sub-Bowl rat started saying, my wife? Like, it's very much a...
Did a very good job at thinning out my Facebook friends when that happened. That was...
Why? Because you kept saying it and they kept blocking you?
Look, I don't need fingers pointed a second time in one episode.
Pizza's get you... pizza. I don't know why. I went to say my name instead of your name and then replaced it with pizza. Right.
Wow.
What I was trying to say is David has got his pre-made crust at the ready as he says, my wife, I'm making a pizza for my wife.
It's second best pizza in the country.
And then he walks outside and sees some nice dogs outside, holds up a slice and says, you will never get this, you will never get this. And then one day he gets off his leash and he gets this.
I feel like it's been too long since I've seen Borat, but as soon as I say that sentence, nah, I'm good. I don't need to see it again.
I don't think you do. Some of it's just ingrained into my head from that time though. So anyway, right? He has to go drop off the car that he's been working on. And even when he finishes working on the car and he starts the engine, he sort of like grips the wheel and says, "I love you." And it's like a funny little moment, but it's again setting up that he likes working on things. He likes the tactile involvement of things and fixing things with his hands. So, which also sets up the idea of how tragic it is when he loses the ability to do anything with his hands or legs, because he appreciates it. He really makes use of it in his life. I mean, everyone would be upset at losing that ability, but this is someone who really does use them. So he needs her to go with him because she needs to drive him back, basically.
Yeah.
And she says she doesn't need to go, and I guess that's technically true. I guess the self-driving car could just follow him there. It doesn't need to have someone in it, technically. But it's a bit risky, I suppose.
I mean, I would agree if the place they were going was just on a normal ass street, but this guy lives like in his own created Stonehenge, so
next to
I think this might be a bit. Yeah, it might be a little bit off the beaten path for a self-driving car, even.
Yeah, and he takes her inside to like show off this fancy like place, and this is the first thing I don't like about the movie. Really, is this character, Aaron. He is very. I don't know. He's got this sort of quirky thing. Like I feel like he's doing an impression almost of Rami Malek, the way he's trying to speak, but he's not quite as good at it. And he's got the blonde like dyed hair and all that stuff. And he's very kind of like not paying attention. He isn't taught like a normal human being. He's meant to be this eccentric billionaire. He feels a bit of a caricature, I guess,
of Elon Musk.
It occurs to me that I've never really sat down and listened to Elon Musk actually talk out loud, so I don't really know what he sounds like. But
yeah, no, same here. But just in terms of not being good with people and such like that, and not knowing the right things to say, I'm gonna go ahead and say that's a caricature.
Yeah, he very quickly starts to talk about this fancy computer chip that he's building that can do anything. And again,
which I just love the sequence of that scene, though, because the whole reason he brings it up is that the wife is like, hey, I'm in the same industry as you. We use technology to like help people and like improve their lives, like veterans and stuff like that. And he's like, yeah, but you guys suck. Check out what I got.
Yeah, actually, I do appreciate that the movie at least establishes there's at least two big tech companies doing like cybernetics. Like it's not just one. Like some sci-fi falls into that trap of being there's only one company that does all this.
Yeah, the Weyland-Yutani or whatever.
Yeah. Although, no, to be fair, Weyland-Yutani used to be two separate companies and they merged, which actually feels very realistic given the way things are going.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. You guarantee the moment these chips hit the market, they're just immediately going to fold these two companies together.
Yeah, so, yeah, they show off this fancy chip, and Gray immediately is like, hey, like, is this such a good thing that this can do all this stuff? Now, admittedly, when he's saying this, he's not necessarily thinking about it in terms of helping people who can't walk. He's thinking more about how all the jobs it's going to take, because this thing's going to do so many of the tasks that people could do, which is a fair, fear. Like, I'm all for replacing humans with computers for almost every task, but I think the caveat to that is, though, when I say that, is that I think in turn, we have to accept that everyone should just be given income for no reason then.
Yeah, it's the Star Trek thing, where the moment we get the technology to do these crazy, beautiful things, you then immediately have to fold over and say, and therefore you are allowed to live without having to do work. Yeah, congratulations.
Like, if you're going to take away labor, that's fine, but just pay everyone or just change the system so that currency is not irrelevant anymore. Like,
which, in fairness, I think this movie did a good job of setting up that there are a lot of people who are just incredibly poor and incredibly poverty-ridden, where it's obvious the world hasn't done that for them.
Yeah, I do wish it kind of even dove into that a little bit more, because like the neighborhood that Gray says he grew up in, where a lot of the stuff happens, where a lot of the sort of nastier people live, it does feel like a really poor area. It feels like there's not a lot of fancy stuff here, and it's maybe something they could have explored a little bit more. But anyway, so they're on their way home, and they're being flirty in the car, and she's like, hey, there's some benefits to not having to drive the car, and they start making out and whatnot. But then he notices, wait a minute, we're not on the correct path home. We're if anything, we're going the opposite direction. So they try to override, and then the car crashes. It's just something. The car doesn't respond to them.
Mm-hmm.
It crashes, and then some men come up after the car's flipped. They pull them out of the car, and the sort of leader of this group, who takes off his mask, he's sort of skinny, he's got like the comb over hair, and he's got like a mustache.
He's like the least intimidating villain you can possibly imagine, but he's the villain.
And he gets up. This is the weird thing, because later on we find out that these guys are just work for hire. Like, this is not a personal thing to them. They're just being paid to kill someone. Effective. Well, technically not kill someone, but we'll get to that. But this is not a personal thing. Although maybe killing the wife is a personal thing, because we find out later the job was for Gray's injury. So maybe, when this guy says, "Hey, you look down on me, don't you, you rich bitch? Like, you look at me and you think I'm scum," and then he shoots her and kills her. Maybe like that murder was just a personal thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say so. This guy's name for future reference is Fisk, and yeah, it seems to me like, from what we understand at the end of the movie, that she obviously was not supposed to be killed, but he just wanted to, because I
wasn't sure if she wasn't supposed to be, or if it was intentional collateral, to
get him to that point.
Yeah, when the plan was put in motion, it's like, part of this is that you injure him, but you have to kill her because she's there, kind of thing. Or maybe that's even fair. To like depress him enough that he'll be more willing for all the stuff that is coming.
Yeah,
but,
I could see it either way, but I definitely get the vibe that Fisk got pleasure out of it. He was happy to do it, because he does not seem to like the people who are up top at the moment.
No. He seems very patriotic. He's proud of being a soldier, and seems to think that he is much better than everyone else because of he's a ex-military dude.
Yeah.
That's what little we get of him later on. But Gray, on the other hand, is seemingly shot in the back of the neck, which severs his spine from his brain and paralyzes him from the neck down. And, that leads us quite nicely into the scenes at the hospital, and the scenes of like him coming home in the wheelchair, and this nurse explaining to him, "Oh, I've got these robotic arms installed that'll make things for you. It'll make food, make drinks, all this stuff."
And like the full wiring up of everything is now voice activated. You can just say, "Hey, do this thing," and it'll do it for you.
Yeah. There's like a big charging pad for his electric wheelchair on the floor that he sits on, and
I kept expecting that, because they went out of their way to show the charging pad. I kept expecting it to come back as a thing that he doesn't have a charge, and it just never does.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't really matter if it has a charge or not at a certain point, because he's got the chip in him and he's running around and whatnot. But yeah. And there's a nice little moment here actually where his mum's with him, sort of getting him set up, and she's like washing him at one point, and he just sort of breaks down and starts crying. And I think it's very believable that he tries to commit suicide. Like, his wife has been killed in front of him. He's lost the ability to walk or even move his arms. Like, understandably, he is going through some serious trauma and PTSD right now. Yeah. And he gets the robot to administer like his medication for the day, and then he's like, "Oh, something didn't go quite right. Do it again." And then he keeps saying it, and then after like 5 doses, the computer's like, "Sorry, that's too much to administer in one day. It'll be lethal, so we can't do that."
I actually really appreciate that. Not from a, it's not a huge moment in the movie itself, but I really appreciate just world building wise of, if you have robots applying medicine, yes, it makes sense that they need to be able to correct themselves if they make a mistake. But I like that they also have this built-in fail-safe of, if I made a mistake this many times, I can call somebody and a human can come in and take care of it. Even the robots realize, like, we're not at the point yet where we are fully autonomous. I can pull in a real human to fix this.
Yeah. So he ends up in hospital again, and this is when Aaron comes in. So
before this scene, though, the only other thing that happens is at one point, the police station, where he is called into the station. We meet our detective, who is played.
Case in point, he's not called in. He insists on going in to get an update.
Oh, that's right, he does. Yep. And he meets up with Detective Cortez, who's played by Betty Gabriel, who has been in a lot of stuff now that I'm looking back on her entire filmography here. Most recently, I was just watching the Amazon Jack Ryan series, and she's a major character in that.
Okay.
But yeah, so she basically gives a rundown of we had police drones in the area. They were able to see the crime happening, but we don't have anything yet. And he's super pissed off about this because he's like, all of this technology, you literally have Minority Report going on over there, and you just don't have anyone. And she's like, well, we'd love for you to help. And he's like, how? I am quadriplegic. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah,
So,
again, this further develops his disdain for the technology around him, and the fact that he now has to rely on it, and it can't even help, solve his wife's murder. So, yeah, like, it sets all this stuff up. So when he's offered the choice of getting technology that will help him walk again, he doesn't really want it. He actually says to Aaron, like, I don't want it to restart my life. I want to end it, right? And I physically can't do that. The one opportunity I had was maybe convince the robot to OD me, and unfortunately they had a failsafe built in so it wouldn't do that. So I'm stuck here. But Aaron sort of pushes him by saying, what would your wife want? What would she want? She would want you to start again. So he goes in for the operation. They put the chip in, and I will critique slightly the scene where he's in the wheelchair after, or it's not a wheelchair, it's just a chair, but he's in a chair after the operation, and they're like testing his muscles and movement, and he does sort of like move his finger and he lifts up his hand, and I was okay with that, right? But Aaron comes over and says, all right, now try to stand, and I thought, wait a minute, he's not stood up in weeks, like months.
3 months.
Even 3 months, right? See, if you're on like a long bus ride or something, they insist on you getting up and walking around every like several hours just to make sure your legs don't atrophy and your muscles like need to be trained again. And so I was glad that at least gave him a couple of walking sticks, but he sort of throws them down after a few steps, and I went, bullshit, this is not about a computer chip. His muscles need to be trained again. He's not been walking for 3 months.
The only thing I could think is, it's the future. Maybe there is some extra little thing, because obviously in current physical therapy things, if you're trying to get somebody walking again, you would exercise their legs even if they're unable to walk. You would stretch them, you would move them and do whatever. Maybe in the future they have something extra for that just stops atrophy.
Okay.
They never show it, and I'm giving the movie credit, but yeah.
Well, I think in his case, though, they don't think he's ever, like, there's not even a chance he's ever going to walk again.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure.
So I don't think they necessarily would be, unless they're just doing it for the sake of, I don't know, keeping his legs in good shape.
Yeah, he just doesn't become a shriveled up little prune of a man from the neck down.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a big deal, but it stuck out to me, because to this day I've been making fun of an episode of Arrow where someone who was in a wheelchair for months just stood up and walked out in high heels, no less.
Yeah, that's the part you got to say. The high heels is what sells it as a beautiful little moment.
But she doesn't even struggle, though. She stands up and just struts out the room, and I'm like, no! You've been in that chair for like 5 months! Anyway, so... right. So he goes home, he signs an NDA as well. He's not allowed to talk about the fact that he's had this experimental tech put in him, so it's all very illegal that he's done this, because he's meant to await approval and things like that.
Stupid little things like the FDA just keep getting in the way.
So he goes home and he's just sort of doing whatever, and then all of a sudden there's a voice in his head starts talking to him, and he's like, I'm insane, who is that, stop talking. And it's like, this is STEM. I'm the computer. I'm helping you control your body. He's like, do you have to talk? No, if you don't want me to, then stop talking. And then like 2 minutes later, he's like, okay, start talking again. Okay, help me with this case.
I appreciate that moment so much, because I feel like I'd be in the same sort of situation where if all of a sudden I heard a voice in my head and I told it to stop talking and it did, I'd be like, it's still there. It's just waiting.
Honestly, one of my favorites, because they look over the drone footage of the wife's murder, and one of my favorite little things in this movie is when the STEM says, hey, I can see a tattoo on this guy, give me control of your hand and I'll draw it. I love the way it draws it, where so he's just it's like he just holds a pen in his hand and he says, give me control of your hand and I'll draw it. I love that he draws it like a printer, where he's just going backwards and forwards in lines, making. It's
literally just a 3D printer, just here you go.
So I thought, oh, that's a really cool little effect they've done there. I really appreciate that. And it's like, oh great, we've traced down this ex-military dude, because the tattoo's got like a number on it or something. And it's like, yeah, but you can't tell the police. It's like, well, why? Because you signed an NDA. You can't tell anyone. So if you can't tell anyone about me and the fact that I use my fancy, eye technology to read this tattoo and draw it.
I was gonna say that's the other part that I actually loved about it, was that they showed the footage from the drone, and instead of doing the stupid ass like enhance and it just shows up crystal clear, it's still blurry as hell, but it's because he's a super smart AI that he's able to like process it and get it back.
Which actually, like, this is more believable now even than it was then, because of the way AI upscaling works now and what I've been seeing results in that field. I'm like, you know what, I actually buy that an AI can take that blurry image and do something with it now.
2046 for sure.
So he's like, okay, well, I guess we'll go and check out the guy's house on our own then. And that's sure enough. And I assume this is the action scene that you saw a clip of, was this first fight. Where he sneaks into the house when the guy leaves. And again, it's a simple little thing, but like you said earlier, this guy just has an old school lock on his door, because it's the future and some people have electronic locks. And Stem's like, oh, I can't do anything about the lock, you'll have to deal with that. And sure enough, like, Gray pulls out a lockpick and does it matter. It's like, oh, this is almost like a match made in heaven. This guy is very good with old school stuff and fixing mechanical things.
It's the sort of thing where, like, if you're in somewhat of a post-apocalyptic scenario where, like, computers or stuff are still up running, you want to pair together the tech guy who can figure that out, but then also the survivalist who knows how to live off the land and be able to survive that way. Yeah.
So they go snooping around. They find some references to a bar that's relevant for later, because that's where he's going to go a bit later in the movie. But the big thing, though, is that the guy comes back and Gray just sort of hides in the corner, and he's like in the reflection, so the guy sees him quite quickly. But Stem's trying to give him directions of being like, okay, now's your chance while he's off guard, while he's not aware of you. But Gray can't, because he's not a fighter. He's never really done anything like this before. And when the guy starts attacking him, like, Gray's just kind of getting his ass kicked. The guy's beating him up. And then eventually Stem's like, I can help you if you give me permission to take control. And he's like, I give you permission, go. And immediately you get this cool shot, because he's on the floor and he sort of stands up by just kind of like tilting forward, and the camera goes with him. And like all the motion in the scene really flows in this very unnatural robotic way, but it works because the whole idea is that his body's moving independently of his own head. It's really quite something, but it's almost darkly funny at points where he's like sort of shocked and saying, oh god, as like he's watching his hand stab a man or whatever. I mean, hell, the end of this scene is where he puts the knife in the guy's mouth and just pulls back until like his like mouth's just ripped open an unnatural amount and he's dead.
So you say dark comedy, and I agree, but I think it actually goes further than that, because obviously when he first hears Stem in his head, they kind of play it for a short little laugh for a minute before it really gets into the core of the whole movie. This one, the entire time he's beating up this other guy, Greg's just like, stay down, man. Oh god. He's just making all these funny little quips, basically. And that's kind of what made me think of Blue Beetle the most, is that exactly how Jaime is written in almost all of his comics, of just like, hey, deal with this guy. And then the thing starts going obscenely more violent than he expected. And he's like, oh no, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean this, please stop.
Which is saying something, given this guy was involved in the murder of his wife. The fact that he's even given this guy some sympathies, saying something. I kind of like it though, because you get this like reaction from him as this stuff's happening. And I think the bigger question that it kind of raises, maybe you don't think about this when you're first watching this scene, but it is kind of a sign that, Stem doesn't seem to have a problem with just brutally murdering someone. Like, that's kind of a big deal.
Well, it's, as Aaron puts it later, he basically says, the chip will do whatever you tell it to do. If you say murder, it doesn't have a morality. It will just do it. Yeah. That's the whole point of the chip, is to just do whatever your mind tells it to do.
Yeah, but there's a bit of a grey area here, though, because he doesn't actually tell him to murder him. He just wants him to protect him. And Stem kind of interprets that and ultimately kills this guy as a result of that request. So there is kind of an interpretation thing here. And obviously where the ending goes, like, I think, this is a bit of a red flag that's, going to be a thing later.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously this comes down to the Asimov's laws of robotics, where, don't harm a human, always listen to humans, don't harm yourself. And this one just skipped that first law and jumped to the second, where, yes, you always have to listen to this particular human, but we didn't stop you from killing other people. So,
unfortunately, Aaron's not too bright, apparently, and didn't put in some safety concerns with the AI.
What? Are you telling me that the Elon Musk stand-in doesn't care about safety concerns? What? Huh?
So, he's like, oh shit, like, we just killed this guy, what are we going to do now? And Stem's like, erase your fingerprints. He's like, I can't remember everything I touched. I've taken note of every single thing you've touched since we entered the house.
Okay, then. Guess I'll do that.
I guess I'll get a cloth out. All right.
Yep.
So, yeah, he goes home, and like, honestly, one of the things that I do think drags the pacing down a little bit, not because it's poorly paced per se, but just because I just find it really uninteresting, is the detective, like, coming to question him, thinking that he might be involved in the crime. It just, there's something really unsatisfying about it, because obviously she knows that he isn't able to stand up or do anything, but obviously he was spotted on camera near the murder scene of this guy, so she comes in and talks to him, and it's meant to be kind of tense. It kind of feels like it's going through the motions, these scenes, where it's like, I feel like the ending would probably have benefited a lot from really caring about this person as an innocent, an innocent who we don't want to see hurt, because she's in the right technically, even though she's investigating our main character. But the movie kind of undersells her a little bit, and as a result, you just never really feel like you're that connected to her.
Yeah, I 100% get that. All of her stuff basically comes down to the idea of she is a competent cop. She is, as soon as she's able to narrow down, hey, wait a minute, this guy who has his mouth slit open this crazy Joker-esque way, let's check his house. And then she sees the footage of Gray approaching in his wheelchair, and it's just like, that's weird, but that immediately puts him as a suspect. She doesn't like hem and haw saying, that's impossible, there's no way about that. She's like, no, okay, something crazy's going on, because this quadriplegic man is just there.
And notably, when she puts into the system, like, you see her at her desk, and she puts in add to suspect list Gray so-and-so, and the computer, after a little second of processing, says, no, incompatible suspect, because he's quadriplegic. And I do like that subtle detail that the computer just disregards him because it's not possible, but a real human being who's able to consider the likely scenarios is actually correct. Like, she's right. He is the suspect. He did do it.
Yeah. She can't explain to a computer how weird it is that he is in the area, and even if he's a quadriplegic, like, he's fitting the profile here of everything's wrong with this.
Yeah, obviously she's suspecting maybe at a certain point that he's faking his illness, which he's not. It's obviously a lot more complex than that, but that's that's the explanation that makes the most sense to her, is that he must be faking the injury.
But then when she comes to interrogate him, more or less, just kind of investigate him, Stem is inside of Gray's head, basically walking him through the process of, like, she's thinking this, you should say that. Yeah. And he eventually gets to the point of, like, look, you want to stab me in the leg, go ahead and stab me in the leg, because he knows that Stem is able to just turn off his pain receptors and make it seem like he is still quadriplegic.
Yeah, and in fact, that exact thing happens, just with a different character, because the next big set piece is the bar scene, where he goes to the bar to try and find out more of these guys, because there was 4 people, right? There's 4 people in the team that came and killed his wife. Obviously, the main guy, Fisk, was the one who actually shot her, but he was with a team. And he goes to this bar, and he just kind of, like, says, excuse me, everyone, and it's this, like, really shady bar where everyone's, like, this tough individual. In fact, some of the characters here were a bit weird. One woman had, like, pointy ears, like she was a Vulcan, and I'm like, I guess this is just, like, decorative, like, cosmetics in the future.
Yeah, it strikes me the sort of thing of, like, Cyberpunk, where it's just, eventually you get to a point where you can just do these little cosmetic surgeries and it doesn't even matter.
So There's a few kooky characters in here, but he's like, "Hey everyone, I was looking for the people who killed my wife. Is anyone here know this guy? Yeah, because I killed that prick the other day. So anyone else want to fess up?" So turns out, yeah, one of the other guys is here and comes up and pushes him into the bathroom, which has just got bullet shells everywhere because clearly they murder people back here all the time.
Oh yeah.
And like he's testing to see if he's faking, so he stabs him in the leg, he pricks him in the stomach, and then he gets him in the neck, and he's like, "Oh, do you feel that, right?" And then eventually, when the guy's talking enough, he's staying in quadriplegic mode because he wants, because this guy basically, he thinks he'll confess if he thinks there's no reason not to, because he just keeps saying, "I just need to hear you say you were there, that you were there when my wife was killed." And eventually the guy just like, "Yeah, all right, I'll admit it, I was there." And immediately Gray's like, "All right, Stem, kick in, morphin time." And sure enough, we get another sort of big set piece moment where he's fighting this guy.
I appreciate the idea that Stem is in total control of the body, and while he's in control, he also just sort of doesn't have the pain receptors going or anything like that.
Well, actually, a detail here that I liked on that point is that at one point the guy picks him up and sort of like runs like across the room, and the back of Gray's head hits like a lamp, and he does like react to that because his head does still feel pain. He can't turn off the pain in his head. So I like that little detail that his head is still vulnerable to, obviously he'd be vulnerable to being killed by being shot in the head, but even being hit, like he has to defend his head because he will feel that.
Yeah, it's a smart little detail. But what I was going with that is that I can, because of that way that he does the stand up from the completely lying flat, all I can imagine is that Stem is like hyper extending the muscles in his ankles to do that. And that's fine, he can do it, whatever. But I fully expect the moment that he's like, "You are now in control of your body," he just goes, "Holy crap, Stem, you snapped my tendons."
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. He should be in pain when he gets control back because shit, you've been twisting all my body parts in ways that don't make sense. Exactly. One of the details that we've not mentioned about the bad guys is that the 4 bad guys in the team all have implants where they've got like a gun built into their arm.
That's right. Yes.
So they've got like a loader up their arm, and then they've got like in the palm of their hand they've got the actual barrel.
And then it's discovered that this sort of implant comes from the same company that the dead wife was working at.
Yeah, because they're vets, and this is like apparently some vets who get injured in battle, they basically become, as one of them puts it, lab rats, where they're given the experimental tech to test out. So, but it seems like these guys have went kind of rogue, and they're now mercenaries for hire. And the leader Fisk, as we find out when he comes to talk to the bar owner to like question about these events, he thinks he's like God walking on water, where he's like, "You pathetic scum, you should be privileged serving my kind." Like that's what he says to. It's really weird. But anyway, we get this action scene here. It's basically Stem tortures the guy by cutting up his face to get him to talk, because when Gray asks him for information, he doesn't tell him. So Stem goes to work on him and gets the information. And then it's funny actually, because when he comes back out the bathroom, he's back in the chair again, and he's wheeling out, and like everyone's surprised because everyone in the bar like heard screams, thought it was him screaming, because they thought, oh, they're taking him back there to teach him a lesson for talking up in the bar. But then they see him roll back out, and they're like, "Wait a minute, what the hell happened?" And the bar owner goes back and sees like the carnage, and is like, "I need a mop."
Someone get me a phone and a mop.
Needs a mop.
So one other thing that happened earlier on is that he was actually called back to the lab by Aaron, and was basically told, like we said, that the computer chip will do whatever you tell it to do. But he explicitly told him, like, stop. If you are caught, if you are arrested, or at worst, if you are killed, you will be caught. They will see your chip, and then I am going to jail. So cut it.
Yeah, and he threatens that he can turn him off. Well, actually, I don't even think he threatens. I think Stem just says that to him. He says, "Hey," it's before they go to the bar, he says to Gray, "If we go to the bar to try and find this next killer, then Aaron will know that I'm where we are, and he will try and shut me down remotely, and you'll be quadriplegic again." So when they're at the bar after the fight, he's like, "Hey, I can sense Aaron trying to shut me down. We have to deal with that." And he's okay, how do we deal with that? Well, we have to go to like a black market like hacker, and get them to take off the safety guards.
we need you, someone that can hack into the chip on the same level as Aaron and take off the safety guards. He's like, oh, okay, I'll just open up my book of hackers. And he's like, oh, don't worry, I went on the darknet yesterday and found one for you. It's like, oh.
Which does lead into the idea that this is a big part of STEM's plan, is that he needs to get these safety blocks removed so that he can do what he wants to later. But so we get this sort of like, okay, get to this address that's like 10 streets away, and he's like running down there. There's no time. He's also like telling him code to write in his arm because the hacker's going to need this code to do the thing.
Yeah.
But by the time he gets to the building, like his leg stops working, so he's sort of crawling up the hallway, and he gets to the door. This hacker's a very kooky one, aren't they? Because Gray calls them Jamie because that's what STEM called them, and she's like, that's not my name. Also, don't ask my gender. And I actually thought this was quite funny the way it cut to Gray, and he's like, I wasn't going to do that.
Yeah, don't worry, wasn't planning on it.
Yeah.
This was the one point in the movie, so everything else to me felt like it was kind of like the world itself is developed, but they just kind of brought things up and then dropped them very quickly. For instance, in that scene where Fisk is at the bar talking to the bartender, we get this shot.
This was the worst.
Yeah.
This was the worst bit of tech in the movie. That was just
exactly.
It felt like a just wild idea that didn't fit with everything else, which is that he can sneeze nanobots that will then fly into the nose of the victim and then just eat their brain.
Right. And you see the visual, you know exactly what it is, and then it just like never comes up again. They have one passing reference when he's fighting Fisk later on, but like it doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah.
So
especially when I'm like the scene would have been served just as well by him holding up his hand and shooting him. Like,
yeah,
like you've set up the gun in the hand. We're going to use it again later, so this establishes it further. This nanotech never comes up again, so I don't even know why they bothered.
But see, that's what I think this same sort of thing is. We get this hacker, and the hacker does hack into the guy's chip and takes off, as they called it, the input safety guards. But then the hacker just disappears, just walks away. And as they're walking away, they specifically say, like, we can't let them win. They're very cryptic, very like, oh, what do we mean by that? But then just leaves.
Well, actually, I've already finished the movie, and I have to ask the question again. Who is them? Because I still don't know.
Right, and that's what I think. So currently under Leigh Whannell's filmography, like slated to come up, he is a director on a series called Upgrade. I think that this was kind of a thing where he had an idea for like sequels and such, and this is kind of like the hook to a larger universe where he was like, we can follow this hacker character.
So there's going to be a TV show potentially that sort of
potentially
builds on that. That's interesting.
It's still in pre-production, and I don't know how long it's been in pre-production, considering this came out in 2018.
It may be development hell, yeah. It may never.
Yeah. But I still think that's the idea of it being this hook where it's, if we want to branch out, here's a character we can focus on.
Yeah, I'm totally glad you brought this up, because I like that line, we can't let them win, because when they said it in this scene, I didn't remember it from my first viewing. I went, wait a minute, what does that refer to? I don't remember that coming up again. And it doesn't come up again. Like, I guess you could try and read the implications here, but it's not like, I don't think the hacker wants the computers to take over, and certainly it doesn't. So I don't think they wanted to help STEM. I don't know, it's weird. But anyway, the thing that does get set up here, though, thematically, is when he comes into the room with the hacker, there's a bunch of people who are hooked up to VR sets, and they're all just like, and they're hooked up to like IVs and piss bags and stuff. And he's like, what, are they all in VR? He's like, yeah, they stay in VR for like weeks sometimes. And he's like, but why? Like, why would anyone want to live in a fake world? And the hacker says, well, the fake world doesn't hurt as much as the real world. And this is like the one kind of shoehorned attempt at foreshadowing something at the ending, which I don't think is satisfying. But it's technically here. Technically, they set it up with that line. But
I mean, yes, I see what you're saying. But on the other hand,
I'm not praising it. I don't think it's enough. I don't make that clear. I don't think it's enough.
All I could think of the moment this scene started, because I knew how it was going to go. They're all in VR, and like clearly they've been in that for a long time. It's just that scene from Inception. It's just the exact scene where he enters a room where a whole bunch of beds of people are sleeping, and he's like, oh, do they just sleep? And it's like, oh, the dream has become the reality. Who are you to say otherwise? And I'm like, I've seen this before, this exact scene.
No, that is completely fair. So by this point, the Fisk basically read the eyeball data, because they've all got, like, you know, eye implants and shit.
Yeah.
He's read the eyeball data of the other guy that was killed at the bar, and because Gray talked about the address that he was going to in front of him, he knows where he is. So Fisk and his one remaining other dude, like the other guy, the long-haired dude, they're coming to get him. So there's this sort of countdown where when they show up to see him and the hackers fled, like, Gray's on the floor. And he's like, shit, I can't do anything. Because he has to wait for his system to reboot. Like, the hacking's been done, but STEM's shut down until the systems reboot. Luckily, though, STEM kicks in at the last possible second to start fighting these two. Because, you know,
he starts doing backflips out the room just to escape. There's also a thing of Aaron, having believed that he shut STEM down, has sent a retrieval team to go pick him up in order to get them back to the lab.
Which makes sense, but they just get killed by Fisk when they're coming up. They don't even get to have an action scene. They get killed in the elevator before the doors open.
It feels like that was more so to show the, like, veracity and how much of a formidable foe Fisk actually is.
I think that's what they were going for.
Yeah, but, like, it didn't do enough, I guess, in that direction. It just still kind of felt like, yeah, no, he's got a lot of tech stuff, but, like, I think the biggest problem is that we're told that the chip that he has, the chip that Gray has, is so much more advanced than anything else that currently exists, that it doesn't feel like, no matter what Fisk does, that he could ever be on the same level.
I don't even think that's the problem, really, because I think they do a decent enough job when they actually fight later that feels like, oh no, Fisk, because he has actual experience plus the enhancements, like, he's actually he's holding his own against STEM. STEM even says he's predicting my every move, like, my efforts here aren't working. And then obviously it's Gray actually basically provoking an emotional reaction out of him by making fun of his friend that he killed by saying, hey,
his brother,
he wasn't much of a soldier when I killed the little bitch. Like, he was pathetic. Like, that's what ultimately puts him off his guard, and then STEM can win the fight. So again, it's showing you that idea of the human element was needed. Like, the computer on its own couldn't do it. You need the human element. But here's what I want to talk about, though, is that the problem here isn't that. It's not that the villain isn't good enough necessarily to fight him, because he is good enough to fight him, but obviously we know that STEM ultimately with Gray will overcome him, right? That's your typical hero versus villain, especially in your first movie, right? Not that I necessarily... I guess there is potentially sequels happening, but just as a standalone movie, like, that makes sense. That's what you do for your story. I think the bigger problem is that probably in the bar scene, I think it was, when he was killing the guy there, I think that's the first time it comes up, or maybe it's when he kills the first guy, but regardless, it comes up. One of them says that they were hired to do this job, and as soon as that is said, these four guys that he's hunting are like, okay, they're just like the grunts, right? Yeah. There's a real, like, the real person who's responsible for killing his wife is now some mystery to be revealed later on. And the problem with that is that we spend so much of the time now hunting these four guys down. And I think if Fisk was just the big bad that it was building up to, and that's what the big climax of the movie was going to be, you could give that more time, make it a even bigger fight than it actually is, and you really take a bit more time to set him up as this really evil scumbag that we want to see him take him down. But the problem is you've already told us, no, there's someone higher up the food chain, and he is just the muscle. So all the attempts to make him feel like he's got enough character to make us really care that he's getting beat just feel a little bit hollow, because we're waiting for the reveal of who's really behind it all. And obviously it does feel like either it's obviously Aaron because he just feels like such a slimy little prick, or it turns out to be STEM, which it does, and the movie goes down this path of, no, STEM's been manipulating the whole time because he wants to take his body for himself. Now, I don't conceptually have a problem with that idea, but not only is the ending very rushed, so it feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere when it does come up,
Yeah.
Despite the fact that you can go look back and see the hints, kind of, if you look for them. The bigger problem I have is that, to me, this movie starts off with Gray being very anti, like, technology, or at least, modern, like, future technologies. He's against computers taking over for humans. He believes in doing things himself. And to me, it almost felt like the movie, when it opens, is setting up this idea that he's got that his arc, at least in part, is going to be learning to actually trust an AI. Kind of like iRobot, I guess, right? Where it's like, doesn't like robots to begin with, but over the course of the movie has to learn to trust one. And it's this acceptance that, oh, hey, this robot actually might have a conscience and might have a soul or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying STEM has that, but it kind of felt like maybe he has to accept that he needs help, so therefore he has to accept that he has to rely on a machine, and therefore that's maybe his arc. I think maybe some of that's what my expectations are based on the opening act, but because he's already so against all this stuff at the start, it is a little bit strange to me that the ending's like, no, he was right all along. He should have never trusted machines and technology because the technology ultimately was out to get him. That's a little bit like, I don't know, it feels like a weird step to me in a sense. I think the other problem is that there's another movie that came out a couple of years before this. I won't spoil what it is because it is a spoiler for the ending.
Okay.
But the idea that the robot was manipulating the main character the whole time for their own ends.
I think I'm actually looking at the poster for the movie that you're talking about because it's on the More Like This.
Yeah. So I've already seen this ending done better and less rushed. So you add all these things together where I thought I was going to get more of a bonding with a robot story, combined with the fact that it wasn't fleshed out enough, combined with the fact that I've seen this darker ending done better in another movie only a couple of years before this. You add all those together and the ending's pretty unsatisfying, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was going into it expecting it to be the bonding story. I think that's where it signals early on, is this idea that he does need to be that. I
said bonding as an example. I guess really all I meant was him realizing that he has to rely on something, because clearly that's not something he likes. He likes to do things himself.
Right.
And
well, that's
I think that fits in though to a story of someone who's in an accident like this. Well, it's not an accident, but you know what I mean. Like someone who gets injured like this. It's very common for people who end up in a wheelchair or something like that to really have a problem with people helping them because they want to prove that they can still do stuff on their own. So it almost felt like a natural arc to give the character in that sense.
That's what I'm thinking of. So once the safety guards are removed, we get a whole thing where the cop comes back and she now fully suspects him because his wheelchair was at the bar and he had to leave it behind. So it's almost definitive, and she manages to bug the room and hear her talking to STEM. But the big thing in that sequence is his mom finds out, and his mom was, as you said earlier in the movie as well, trying to help him. And then she just sees him walking into the room because she has keys to the house. I think that the story that I was kind of expecting around this point was, obviously STEM at this point says, when you took down the safety guards, it made it so I don't have to get your permission anymore. I can just take over your body. So we're going to see this thing through to the end. And I thought at that point it was going to go the route that basically it kind of was going for a while there, where he's fighting against STEM. Obviously, he does still want to see justice for his wife, but he's like not just a meat puppet. He is going to be someone who's getting his own control back. And I thought that the end of the movie was basically going to be this idea that he has to get rid of STEM for whatever reason, and then he goes back to being quadriplegic, but like he understands it's okay to live like that. It's not something where he does need the ability to walk around. He doesn't need to be that. He is able to just live life as he is and make the best of it. And the reintroduction of his mom is what I thought really was going to sell that, because she basically is selling the idea of like, you don't have to do this. Like, I'm here for you. I can be that thing that you quote unquote rely on rather than this chip.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But yeah, of course it doesn't end up going that way because it goes for more of a grim, dark ending.
Yeah, I think the thing is though, I don't, again, conceptually I have no problem with the computer's been playing him the whole time because it wants to get out. Because the big thing we find out in the ending is when he goes to Aaron's place, is that Aaron's like, yeah, I'm not in charge of this company. I haven't been for years. STEM's been controlling me for years. and this was all his plan to like get out into the world, and he picked you as a host effectively.
I like he picked him specifically because like everyone else has some level of cybernetic stuff on them. He's the only one who has nothing. He's totally fresh.
Yeah, and again, conceptually, I don't have a problem with that. I just don't think it does enough to earn this ending. And I think part of it is because it is so rushed. Like, there's certain things I like in this ending. I like, Stem trying to shoot the cop lady, and basically Gray fighting him and try to move his hand to the left so that he can't do it, and like saying, no, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to let you do it. She's innocent. I let you kill all the guys that murdered my wife because clearly I obviously have some mixed feelings on those guys, but this woman is innocent. I'm not going to let you do it. But then what happens is that Gray thinks he wakes up and that all of this has been some bad dream. He wakes up in the hospital as if it's after the car accident, and his wife's still alive, and she's... in fact, there's a moment earlier on where he sees his wife in a vision, and it's probably quite... This is when Stem's rebooting, and maybe in hindsight you can sort of look at that and go, oh, this is Stem giving him like a motivating visual in them or something,
Yeah, there's also a moment where he shoots up out of bed and he has a dream of basically his wife is next to the bed. So I have a feeling that all of those quote-unquote visions were just Stem priming this ending.
Yeah.
Like in advance.
Because it feels like, wait, are they doing the whole thing was a dream? And then it cuts to reality again, and Stem's like, no, Gray's now inside his fake world in his head. So this is relating back to the VR stuff. He's in his fake world where he wants to be, I am now in control. And he just shoots the cop and he walks out. And that's the ending. It's just this, this now Stem controlled body walking out into the world, and that's how the movie ends.
Yep.
And like, again, conceptually, this is all fine. The problem is that I remember both the first time I watched it and this time it was almost worse because I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Where once he goes to Aaron's place and we get the last 10 minutes at most, it might even be less than 10 minutes, where all of this comes
with
up.
credits, it's definitely less.
Yeah. It just feels like they're rushing through these ideas so quickly, and I'm like, if you gave me a movie where it really did feel as it went on that we were starting to suspect that the computer was manipulating them and had some sort of sinister goal, or it was I don't know, but it just kind of feels like, as well, when you look back at the rest of the movie, the only point where you could have stopped Stem really was not remove the blockers with the hacker. So in these final scenes, unless Gray can physically just power his own body, which in a way doesn't make much sense because he technically shouldn't be able to if the Stem's the one who's letting him actually control everything. So but that's part of the sci-fi stuff, so we can kind of let that go.
Well, there's a point to that I wanted to make earlier on. So when he's on the way, I believe to Fisk, it might be to Aaron, I can't remember which. There's a car chase scene. And
it's on the way to Fisk, yeah. It's basically the cops following him because she's bugged him. This is after the whole scenes with the mum and all that, and he basically does this whole thing where Stem takes control of another car on the road that's electric and got a computer to crash her.
But here's the thing that I have a problem with, and that is that they specifically say, oh, your car and her car, neither of them are electric, so therefore Stem isn't able to do anything here. It's all up to Gray to be able to get rid of the cop, essentially.
Yeah.
Stem is able to fight. Stem is able to punch and kick and control the body. That's not electric. That's just a body. Why can't he drive this car? Sure, he can't control it directly, but he can control the body that's driving it.
Maybe the idea here is that driving is more of an experienced skill, and while he might know the theory of driving a car, there's something to be said about the muscle memory.
But the fact that they say this chip can do everything, it just seemed like they've been building up his skills so much that he can do anything. And then it's but driving, that's on you, buddy.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like the lockpick as well. You could have argued Stem should have taken control of him and done the lockpick, but it's no, you have this skill, so you can use, you're good at this skill, so you do it. Same with the car. You're good at driving, so you do it.
Maybe it is a thing where he's basically just trying to give Gray an out. Because at this point, he's already revealed the fact, I can control your body whenever I want. This is kind of just giving Gray that little extra, I'm gonna let you control your body right now because I know that you can at least handle this decently. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, though, is that if you really look at it from the idea that STEM, his entire goal, as stated in the movie here, is to kill Aaron because Aaron could make another STEM chip, and he wants to be
one of a kind. Yeah, he wants to be the only.
So because that's the entire goal, you think back to the moment where Aaron called them back to the lab, and that doesn't make much sense at all as to why that happened. But why didn't he kill him there? And the answer is because he still had those safeguards in place. We needed permission to take over the body. So in actuality, the only two things that needed to happen was A, he gets the safeguards removed, B, he kills Aaron. And I don't think that this going through and killing all the rest of the members of the family or whatever, or of the people who killed his wife, I don't think that was really required. I feel like he could have come up with a completely different plan that would have been much easier to get his safeguards removed.
No, to be fair, I think that's more about, like, this gives some villains for Grey to want to be dealt with. So this builds up trust. This builds up Grey to trust STEM enough that he goes along most of this trip, which gets him to the hacker. So at this point, he trusts him a lot more. So that's part of the manipulation. I'm fine with that. I think my bigger problem with the plot as a whole is that as far as Grey actually having a chance to fight STEM, like, well, he basically gets no chance because he doesn't know that he's fighting STEM for most of the movie. But even if you look back in hindsight, there's only, like, once those safety guards are gone, there was never any hope of him winning. Like, there was never any hope of him having any agency to actually win the fight. So it just kind of feels all a bit hopeless after that point when you sort of look back on it.
I'm sorry to take this sideways, but I just had this crazy ass thought that I want to run by you.
Okay.
So after the sequence where Aaron is knocking out the chip, he's powering it down, taking it offline. They show one shot that I just remembered, which is from Aaron's lab, his perspective, and they show the monitor saying error, like system error. I don't think he actually shut down the chip. I think he tried to, but I think that the entire thing was just STEM faking it.
Which makes sense, because if he can shut down STEM, then why would STEM be controlling him? It makes much more sense that STEM's just lying that he's being shut down to convince Grey to go and get the blockers removed. And because they've been on this warpath, taking out these guys and in these dangerous situations where he's been literally saving his life, now Grey thinks he needs him, not just to walk, but just needs him because he's helping him get all this done. So that's what I'm saying. It's building up this trust, and then it's like, hey, here's a reason why you have to get these blockers removed, because Aaron's going to stop us, but Aaron's not actually the one doing anything. If anything, Aaron, maybe he does technically shut himself down, because, like, as we said, the hacker does have to reboot it when the hack's done. So maybe the reason why Aaron sends those two guys to come and pick him up is because he thinks, oh shit, now's my chance. He's turned off. He can see that he's turned off, and is sending people in to get him so that he can finally get rid of STEM forever, finally kill it, and that would be over. And these are actually okay little background details now that we're sort of talking about them and bringing them out. We're sort of drawing blood from the stone a little bit with this. But I don't hate any of this, what we're saying right now.
No, not at all.
I just wish all the ideas that it actually wants to do in the last 10 minutes, I just wish, one, it was more than 10 minutes, and two, they were better built to over the course of the movie. Because the way the movie was building to me, not only did I expect a slightly different arc for Grey as a character, something a bit more positive, I guess. Yeah. But I also... It felt like an action movie, so I felt like it was building up to a big scene at the end where he was going to use all these cool action skills with all this cool cinematography, and instead we're going to stand and talk to the villain.
That's what I'm saying. It goes back to Saw, because you think about how Saw ended, and it's pretty much the same ending. Just, again, it's just in a slightly different format.
But I can see what you're saying, but the difference is that the ending in Saw is good and the rest of it's mediocre. That's true. I'll give you that. Because I don't think Saw's that good. But the ending's one of the best parts of Saw, and the twists make a bit more... They're at least more fun. This has the potential to be much, much better, though. And in terms of a stylistic sense, it is better. but then it falls flat at the end because nothing actually feels like it pays off. Like, narratively, it feels very unfulfilling at the end to me.
Yeah.
And that's a shame, because
no, I get that.
the potential's there. Potential is absolutely there.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh well, I guess we're going to upgrade.
Oh boy. Do I have to go first? Is that can we not switch that up on a new show where it's like, hey, maybe every other episode Pete can just go first?
It's not a new show.
It's new to me.
David, I am in control.
All right. Well, I'll just shut down and say whatever you want me to say then. I don't know. I agree that the ending is by far like the weakest part of this movie, but I was just having so much fun with it up until then. I think that if this were my second go around, I would be a lot more harsh on it, because I'm not having that idea of, I know where it's going. I can see this ending that's not going to be satisfying, and therefore I'm just not enjoying it in the first place. But I was really into all the fight scenes. I think stylistically it had a good thing going for it, and I was hoping for a better sort of wrap up, but it just didn't quite get there. I'd say I would see this as maybe 6.5. That seems right to me. It just it had enough to it in the first part that I do think it is still worth a watch. And it might be even more than that if you think the style is enough for you. But yeah, it's because that twist ending, or it's not even a twist, just that poorly done ending kind of just doesn't have enough to it. I can't put it as high of a 7. So 6.5 is where I'm at.
Yeah. I think something you said there tracks for me. I think I liked it a little bit more the first time, because while there was imperfections along the way, not knowing that the ending was going to be such a disappointment meant I wasn't as down on it. But I think this time, because I knew it was going to be unsatisfying at the end, I felt like it wasn't building to something the whole time, because I knew it wasn't.
Yeah.
So I maybe gave it a 6.5 last time, maybe a 7 at a push. I think this time I'm going to go with a straight 6 for me on this.
Okay.
So
right. That's reasonable. It's the Game of Thrones problem, where people loved Game of Thrones, and then when all of a sudden the last few seasons tanked, it actually ruined the first few seasons in retrospect.
Yeah. For the record, I didn't like it at the start and gave up early in season 2, but you know.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm ahead of the curve, baby. Can't keep me down. So, yeah, I will, just before we get to David's little bonus homework segment, I'll just say that you can support us on patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses for your trouble. We do 2 monthly bonus shows. We've got the $3 and up tier has access to the Criterion Cut, which is where we review a Criterion Collection movie every month. This month was The Magician, directed by Ingmar Bergman. Interesting little film. And then $5 and up, you get access to Extra Reels, which is me and David doing some of the worst movies of all time. Hopefully so bad they're amazing, but not always the case. In fact, this month's was David Dakota's A Talking Cat. So check that out. So yeah, you can support us over on Patreon. Yeah, next time on the Ace, we'll be looking at the first Mad Max, interestingly. Because there's a new Mad Max coming out next year, so we have to start chipping away at that franchise. And unlike the Collector's Cut, which is the other show that me and David do, where we do franchises all in a row, we're going to spread them out on Ace, so you'll get one every month or two. So
yeah, give or take.
Yeah, look forward to Mad Max next week. But yeah, before we wrap up, we do have our little bonus segment, which is David's homework, which is David, over the course of the next 200 episodes, give or take, is going to go back and watch a movie that we've done in Ace before, that I did with Tara, that he's not seen, so that he's caught up in all the sci-fi movies that the show's already done, so that he's more up to speed when we do countdowns and things like that. He's currently focusing on 80s movies, because we're going to do an 80s countdown next summer, so the next several months will be 80s films from the past episodes of the show. So why don't you reveal what this episode's bonus or homework movie was?
So because after I watched Upgrade, I thought, well, that was very Cyberpunk. So I was like, I'm going to try to stay in that. I'm going to try to do another Cyberpunk film. And my first thought was Blade Runner. But I decided against it because I know the gist of Blade Runner, and it isn't quite the same level of Cyberpunk as this. It's like a different sort of feel to it. So I also didn't know which version I should be watching.
Can I
officially
guess?
Here. I doubt you're going to get it, but go for it.
I'm thinking of something that feels closer in terms of level of technology. My guess would be Death Watch, but I don't know.
Okay. All right. I mean, that would have been fair. Instead, I decided to go with one that I had no idea what the level of technology was.
Okay.
Episode 10, we did Tetsuo the Iron Man.
That's a very different type of cyberpunk, David.
Very different type. So yeah, Tetsuo the Iron Man is 1989. As you had it listed here, cyberpunk. I'm going to go ahead and say surreal horror. But
well, it's a techno horror cyberpunk film.
Yes,
it's very much the one part that it has is the idea of integrating machine with man, but it does it in a more horror way, as you
Cronenberg, yeah. So yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, there's not much I can really say without spoiling it, but there is a man who gets quote unquote infected with something that causes him to basically turn into / absorb technology and metal, and he becomes the Iron Man. And in terms of what I thought about it, it's a goddamn fever dream. It is. I love it. It's stylistically, it's fantastic.
It's very got industrial. It's like the most industrial movie I've ever watched.
Like, as soon as I went into this, I immediately got this feel of, it reminds me of what I remember, like, really early, like, VH1 MTV feeling like, where it had this, like, a whole lot of this movie was stop motion for the sake of, like, doing these super fast scenes, and it's just very frenetic the whole way through. And I also just want to throw out the audio design, where I don't think anything was in camera. Everything was dubbed in after the fact. And it gives this really, really messed up feeling because you can just hear everyone's breath right in your ear.
You called it a fever dream. It does, like, obviously we did this way back at the start of the show, so my memory's a little hazy now. That said, I don't know if you noticed at the end of that review, we did mention it has 2 sequels, which we never got to. So,
and you specifically said we will get to them, so now I'm scared for my own life, but that's a thing. But yeah, no, I would say it's not for everybody, but I did enjoy it just because it has this tone to it that I haven't seen anything really do in the same way. Very art house, very much a weird movie. It's only like an hour and like 5 minutes, if even. So I would say, all in all, that I'd give Tetsuo the Iron Man I'd give it like a 7. It's strangely well done for something that is so clearly low budget.
And absolutely crazy as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did the girlfriend see any of this one?
No, dear Lord. As soon as I went to rent it, and I was like, okay, well, let's go ahead and just take a look at like what I am getting into. And I watched like the little teaser trailer that YouTube gives. There was no way in hell I was going to try to sell that one.
What about Upgrade?
I offered. She was just busy. She didn't want to take the time. So.
Fair enough. It's not a weird movie. I think it should have been fine with it, but yeah.
Yeah, because I remember that action scene. I was like, oh yeah, this one. But, yeah.
Okay. All right, well, there you go. That wraps up another Atomic Cinema Experiment. On top of going to Patreon, like I already said, you can support us by simply hitting the like button on YouTube. It helps us out a lot if you do. More people will find the show, so please do. Or if you listen to the audio version, give us 5 stars on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from. Share us with your friends and whatever. But that is the show, so thank you very much for joining us. And of course, if you've seen Upgrade, let us know what you think of the movie in the comments. Always nice to hear thoughts and feelings. But yeah, we will see you next time, guys. Keep watching science fiction and computer, or I should say STEM, add salsa.